Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. It's myself, George, joined once more by Tom Woods for another entry in the Steven Spielberg Retrospective. And this week we have reached the 1993 film Schindler's List, of course, which is the film that won Spielberg his first directing Oscar, which we'll get to a little bit later on because this is going to be, I would say off the bat, one of the more colder discussions. Would mean you say we've been speaking a lot before this. Obviously, we know the context of this film. If you're watching, you'll know this as well. So I don't think this review is going to be like some of the other ones on the series, because obviously we want to make sure we're coming across respectful and doing this film and its story its justice as well. And it's a very tricky thing to speak about on video, which I'm going to say as well, especially after watching. And I guess before I even introduce Tom, one thing I want to say, obviously myself and Tom, we don't have Jewish backgrounds. And I will say we have tried to get some Jewish representation for this review, but naturally with this, the context of this, we weren't successful in that. And we completely understand that we haven't been able to do so. And in that regard, it's not something everybody might be comfortable about coming on for or wanting to. So again, we're very respectful of anything in that mind, but we just wanted to say that because I think it should be said at the start of a review like this. And it's sort of really not difficult to move on with it, but obviously we've got to go over the usual stuff with the intros, which is even weirder to do now. I've just said that out loud. So Tom, we're going to really quickly jump to you. I know you've seen this just before we've almost hit record.
Yeah.
So not how are you feeling in that regard, but I'm just kind of going to jump in. How was this for a first viewing before I even get into it, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the films that if you say you haven't seen it, people will generally be like, "What? How have you not seen this? Why haven't you seen it?" It's just one that I have never gotten around to watching, and I don't know whether that's because the subject matter made me a bit uncomfortable to watch it, or just because I never got sort of the opportunity. So I literally just finished watching this in the last hour of recording. And it's difficult to summarize how I feel. So one of the things that I was mulling over whilst sort of grabbing a drink and a few bits in preparation for this was that I just felt a bit
uneasy,
uneasy, also a bit dirty. If that makes any sense. So not in the sense of having like the fact that it's just watching the sort of brutality and watching a quite horrific film. It just made me feel a bit
yeah. We're very privileged, certainly the world is a lot more privileged than then, the modern world and first country worlds. And when you step back and look at films like this, it's absolutely fair to feel that way. And I think it's quite a humane feeling because first world problems, that sort of stuff you see online, it's more often than not people like joking and laughing, but it's like we've been through nothing in comparison to not just people in the circumstances, people in the 40s as a whole with war. And it's very easy for us to be, sat here on YouTube in our houses with our cameras. Even when we've had a pandemic, in the last few years, we've been able to go at least contact people via outside means. It's never been anything like this. So when you sort of, without getting too political on the spot, it's like when you see those ridiculous takes from people, screaming about their rights because they're having to wear a mask for 2 hours, and then you do a bit of reading on stuff like this. It's very, very well, it's irritating as someone that understands a little bit of it. But yeah, it's a bit mellowed, and I think this is going to be like this today. And I have to do this stuff. I want to hear from you, so comment your thoughts on the film. Obviously, it's based off real events. If you've seen the film, if you haven't seen the film, your thoughts on this film. Obviously, this is primarily the Steven Spielberg retrospective, and You could argue that this is probably, I would still say, until Fablemans comes out this year, the most personal of his entire 34 filmography. And we'll be able to get into a lot of the behind the scenes stuff and himself and his feelings of the film. So, as I said, please do comment your thoughts if you're a fan of Steven Spielberg. Obviously, we're almost at the halfway point of the series. So, if you're interested, hit the subscribe button. We've got a lot more Spielberg stuff on the way and in the can. We've got a playlist in that description below. So, I'm just going to leave that there and go for our social media in the description. I'm not going to go plug them as normal because it just, this, as you said, there's something a bit uncomfortable about covering a film like this. And with it being sort of 29 years since its release as well, that's one of the sort of bigger things with this. And we always read out the IMDb plot synopsis. I am going to do it this week. I feel a bit uncomfortable doing so, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to everybody. And it's the story of the film and of what happened in real life. In German-occupied Poland during World War II, industrialist Oskar Schindler gradually becomes concerned for his Jewish workforce after witnessing their persecution by the Nazis. It's probably one of the understatements of the year, but I'm not going to get too hyped up on the IMDb plot synopsis this week. We've just spoke, obviously, you've seen it for the first time today. I'm going to say, I don't mind saying this on camera, a massive thank you to coming on. It's been, very hard to get somebody on for this. And again, I completely understand anybody who isn't able to come on. And for anyone curious, Tate is at the moment traveling back to United Kingdom across a couple of days. So not being able to get Tate on board. I know this is coming out on the 12th of July. We are recording it just over a week in advance. So you will probably have seen him on a video by the time this is out, and he will be back. So he did want me to pass on the message that he said this is one of the best films ever made. And I know we've spoke about that before on this channel. And I'm just kind of not talking memories as such. I don't want to go into stories and stuff, but I have seen this film once before watching it yesterday, about 8 years ago. And it was at a time when I was starting to get into film more, studying film more. And there's kind of what you said. You get films that people say, how have you not seen? Or you should own this film, etc., etc. The ones that always spring to mind I haven't seen is like Casablanca, Citizen Kane. There's that like elite tier list where a lot of films people say you've got to see, but then you get a genuine list, I think, of probably 20-30, where it's like you genuinely have to see these films. And I would say this is on that list. And if we're going to kind of like get into this, I mean, it's really hard to jump into.
You'll have to excuse any of the puns as well if we mention lists.
Yes, I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, that's a good place to start because, let's go even pre-production. Obviously, we know this is based off real life. And the background to this film being made is that there was a book written by Thomas Keneally called Schindler's Ark. And the origin of that book is that one of the I know they call them the Schindler Jews in this. I'd imagine the actual German translations probably sounds a bit more normal, but obviously that's the translation here. But Poldek Pfefferberg essentially made his life's work for people to be told about the story. He survived through this, and he spoke to the author Thomas Keneally, who would then go on to publish Schindler's Ark, which is the book that is adapted. And you mentioned the name Schindler's List. I know this isn't really important to it, but I would just immediately say that if Steven Spielberg released another film with Ark in the title, I think that would immediately be very weird. And I think it made better sense to call this film Schindler's List. I know it's such a minor thing in the title, but do you see what I mean? I think some people would interpret it differently if it was called Schindler's Ark.
I can see where you're coming from. Sorry, I'm just sort of gathering my thoughts because it is uncomfortable to talk about, but obviously this is a Spielberg retrospective, and we've got to talk about his back catalogue of films. So this is definitely going to come up, and it's interesting hearing because having seen this for the first time, I know pretty much next to nothing about the behind the scenes. So any sort of tidbits you have would be it'd be great for audience benefit and for mine as well.
No, I'm fine doing. I mean, before people that are curious about how we do behind the scenes here, I'll do a schedule. I'll have like some key bullet points. We have set sections we do each week, and then I was doing today's one, and I just couldn't stop noting stuff because, as you said, this film it's very important to get the behind the scenes. I've just realized I've left my light off, so the lighting is really awkward in my room as well, which isn't intentional. And if we sort of carry on talking about some of the behind the scenes, so I don't mind going through all this, and if I go through it and you give your thoughts after, because
Sure.
how this film came to fruition is actually very fascinating. You're saying, right, I don't want to sit here and say it wouldn't be done today, but certainly in this respect, it wouldn't be done. So Universal bought the rights for this in the early 80s, I think around 1982, 1983. And Spielberg literally told them he would do it in 10 years. He said that he wasn't mature enough as a filmmaker at that point in time to make the film. And he wanted to obviously, I'd imagine, be at where he feels the most comfortable and more mature, with his career, with his personal life, to be able to take on a film like this. So that's like the really early behind the scenes from it. And me and you obviously spoke before this as well, that he'd asked Roman Polanski to direct this, and Roman Polanski passed. Obviously, Polanski did do The Pianist. I don't really want to talk about Roman Polanski much. Obviously, you all know why. But he obviously did go on to do a Holocaust film himself. And Polanski's backstory is that I believe one of his parents passed away in the concentration camps. It was very personal to him as well. And then what surprised me more than anything, which was very new to me, was that Scorsese was then signed on to do Schindler's Lists. And I mean, you were just talking before we went live that I didn't know. I mean, Scorsese, I'm not to assume anyone's religion, but I was like, I'm pretty sure Scorsese isn't Jewish. And, he's Catholic, and I'm kind of glad that didn't happen, because I'm not saying you shouldn't direct it from a certain religion, but for a film like this, where we know its legacy and who did it and their involvement,
Yeah.
I don't think, not to discredit Scorsese, because that'd be the most insane thing anyone could do. I don't think this film should have been made by anybody else, if I'm being honest, in cinema.
You can. So it's one of the things that can be talked about time and time again. But anyone can pretty much direct anything. But the key takeaway is that there's more to glean from it if you have a personal stake in it, rather than are just making it because for the sake of it. Obviously, you know the history, you know everything about it pre going into sort of principal photography, but there's something more. There's something that feels sort of more natural about having someone of a Jewish background directing, which I think is, I'd agree. You just can't see it, because there seem to be. And I apologize for sort of muddling words and things like that, but it would feel disingenuous if someone else directed.
Yeah,
if someone
I think even with Scorsese, we've not really spoken about much on the channel before. I mean, we absolutely love Scorsese's work. There's none of that background. Obviously, Polanski, we can say what we want because of his real life history, and why he shouldn't be making anything. But with Scorsese, I mean, he did Silence in 2016, a film I've still not seen. I know it's got Adam Driver in it, which is one of the big selling points. But that is a film about religion, and with his religious background for that religion, that makes sense. And that's a film he'd wanted to do, that he felt was very personal to himself. And it kind of mirrors that. I'm glad this didn't happen, and not that it means much, but the background to this is that Scorsese basically traded Cape Fear for Schindler's List with Spielberg, where Spielberg was attached to Cape Fear, and they kind of did a swap in the late 80s. And what kind of astonished me finding out is that one of the main reasons Spielberg was prompted to do this, not just because of the story, was that at the time with Berlin Wall coming down, there was a sort of, again, I wasn't, me and you both weren't around at this point, and it's something maybe like my dad would probably know more about, but there was the, not rise of neo-Nazism, but with the Berlin Wall going down, there's a lot of far right-wing politics going around, and there were a lot of Holocaust deniers, which just completely flabbergasts me, not just because that people deny it, but we're sat here in 2022, and yes, we're going to get political again, and this is happening again right now. There are people that don't believe this ever happens. It's obvious for me to pick which country, but I'm gonna keep it nameless for just because that shouldn't be the forefront of this video. And it's not being taught in their schools, which completely blew my mind. And even a personal thing for the United Kingdom. So I studied this at history, not this film. Obviously, the Holocaust we did. Our entire 2-year course was essentially from the women's rights to vote from the late 1800s all the way through to the ending of the Cold War in the late 70s. So we did like modern history for 2 years, and obviously the Holocaust was a massive part of that, and Hitler's rise to power. And what astounded me is that both my sisters, who went to another school, didn't do the Holocaust, and I was sort of completely blown away that it wasn't compulsory in schools. Now, yes, doing history is different to RE. We did it in religious studies as well. But I don't know. I know it's weird to talk about school backgrounds, but did you have this done at school? Because it's really weird talking to my sister finding out their school didn't do it, and they were like a history orientated school as well.
Yeah, we definitely for the sort of history that I was taught. Obviously, you go through periods of sort of Roman Empire, Tudors, blah blah, World War II. Very much in that category was the Holocaust. It's even then it's definitely even then it was subject to not necessarily tiptoe around, but put in a context that is easily digestible for children to understand. And I mean, I even sort of now I still am in complete disbelief that any human could treat another human being in that way, and it's still that's it's one of the greatest tragedies of the history of mankind, and it should be at the forefront. And I think this should also be at the shown in a more educational sense, because for me this is one of Spielberg's or in fact Spielberg's most educational film, as well as one of his best. And it even if you didn't get taught any of that in school, and don't quite understand why you wouldn't, but even if your only sort of knowledge of the Holocaust was through this, whilst it doesn't necessarily paint the whole picture, it gives you an insight into just how absolutely shockingly brutal it must have been. And obviously I'm coming at this from a 30-year-old that lives in a comfy flat, and I my words can't do justice what must have what it must have been like, and what must have happened, because they just can't, and I can't. Words fail to describe what went on. Yeah.
No, it's really well said, and you are right with it. That I think when you're sort of 15, 16, and if anyone's going to cry saying it's relevant to the film, it really is. When you're learning at 15, 16, it's hard to take in the scope of the reality that it might be come across as this is another module in school you're glossing over. Well, not glossing over, but you're covering sort of 80 years of history across 2 years. And obviously the way schools are is not that you need to watch films per se, but teachers aren't legally allowed to show students films under their age. So we had to watch Boy in the Striped Pajamas at the time. I don't want to get into a whole conversation about Holocaust films, but obviously that is a fictional story that is geared towards the younger adults. Obviously there's a lot of background with that film, and people can read into that as they can, but it's hard in the educational system that they can't show this. And even recently on the news, I guess it's worth saying that I think, was it Prince Charles has come out or saying that he thinks that the UK's involvement in slave trade should be compulsory educational, which is 100% certain, because this is something we spoke about a few years ago on the channel when everything happened with George Floyd, and me, Tate, and I think we did a video discussing that. We spoke that isn't something you get educated in England at all, and researching and learning more over the last few years into that side of things has been quite shocking in this regard. Shocking in the sense that I'm not surprised the British Empire did what they did. No one's surprised by it. It's the lack of education about it. So I'm just going to leave that there, because obviously that's a completely different angle for this.
Yeah.
And
we are here the more education people have, the more that they're able to take in that knowledge, because you see it now that sort of there is a rise in intolerance, even starting a decade ago, pretty much. That is just escalating and escalating. And education is one of the best forms of knowledge. If that probably sounds really stupid as a phrase, but yeah, I mean, to be honest,
you learn the most.
Yeah, exactly, and people can gather their own thoughts and opinions based on the facts that are present. Which, in today's society, it seems like everyone just thinks what they want and shouts wrong facts. Well, quote facts. At people.
Especially, again, going off a pandemic we've all been through. It's still ongoing. People need to. It's still ongoing. Whether it's a better side of it or not. And certain countries, certain actresses who have lost roles on big franchises, just do a bit of research on what they really should do, because it's absolutely wrong. And again, modern politics, not to get into politics, but people don't learn from the past. Our country's just about to vote out a Human Rights Act, which is insane, and other countries just took the rights away from women across an entire country, which is more insane. But we're going to head back into this, which, again, people watching at home, this is going to be very difficult. We've said that multiple times. We haven't even actually got into the film itself. One thing I want to speak about, obviously, I know this film is 3 hours 15 minutes long. One of the reasons for this is that Steve Zaillian was hired by Scorsese. He did the screenplay for this to adapt the book. It came in at 115 pages, and when Spielberg took over, read it, he essentially wanted it pushed to 100. Well, when it got to where it got to, it was 195 pages. That's 80 pages long, which normally, in cinematic terms, it's a page a minute you go off. So that's where the time jumps, and I can't remember if we were live at this point or not, but we spoke about the pacing, that it's 3 hours 15, but it doesn't feel long, which is a credit to the direction and the filmmaking behind it. And it's also I'm trying to formulate the words, but not that it shows the horrors, because that's a really simplistic term, but when a film like this is 195 minutes long and you're covering X amount of years, there's no wasted minute. And if anything, it's actually, there's probably even more stuff that were never able to make it to the page, to the screen from the pages and whatnot. And again, 195 pages long, the screenplay. And even a weird bit, we spoke about this, it won't be up by the time, so you wouldn't have seen it, the Jurassic Park review we did last week. Obviously, this is Spielberg's second film of 1993, which is just, we'll speak of that a lot probably later on, maybe towards the latter end of the video. But one of the conditions for Spielberg coming back in this film is in the late 80s with Holocaust deniers gaining media attention, which is something happening today again. And I think it was the president of Universal, Sid Sheinberg, greenlit the film on the condition he did Jurassic Park first. And we spoke last week saying that that's quite a bleak thing, that you have to do this giant blockbuster about dinosaurs first. However, I think in an interview, Spielberg has said that he doesn't think he would have been able to have done Jurassic Park after Schindler's List, which is also understandable. And obviously, next week there is going to be another Jurassic Park review, but there is a 4-year gap. And I believe that is the longest gap of films Spielberg has ever had in between. I will double check that before next week. But it just shows the impact this likely had on him, and the impact we know it had on him. And if we're actually going to talk into, that's some of the polite behind the scenes. We'll talk a little bit more, I guess, sort of moving into the direction and the behind the scenes of this. One thing that's really stood out to me is that he refused a salary for this film, saying it's blood money, which I really respect. When we did the Colour Purple review a few weeks ago, we spoke that he felt he didn't want to direct it originally because he felt like it should be a black director that did so. He wasn't comfortable doing it. Quincy Jones convinced him to do it. He took legally the lowest salary he could, being part of the Directors Guild of America. He had to take a salary, but he took the lowest amount possible. And obviously with this one, he just didn't take the salary for this, which I completely respect. And it's quite empowering seeing them as being into blood money, because I know this is irrelevant to this series in this video, but obviously Tom, I do like a lot of autograph collecting in all these groups. I mean, the one thing that I've always seen of people is that Steven Spielberg won't sign Schindler's List posters. He won't sign anything from that film. And when I was a bit, not younger, but I was kind of thought, not that it's weird, but in this early stage of autograph collecting, I was like, I can understand why. And, again, doing some research for this today, doing, some reading and looking more into life for the last few months, it's completely understandable why he wouldn't want to touch it, because it's almost like he's made this film out of respect rather than out of needing to. That we'll get into the Oscars later, but he did not make this film to win any Oscar. Fundamentally, some directors do. Some production companies will greenlight films for that, but this is not one of those. And it was really interesting having that sort of autograph background. That, you know, the way autographs work is, yes, you know, I display a lot of mine. You can see them behind me, and there's a Spielberg one up there as well. From when I did meet him previously, a lot of people that get these autograph signs is to sell, and in turn they'd be making money off him signing Schindler's stuff. And going back to what he said, you know, it would be blood money. I completely respect that. I know it's irrelevant to the discussion of this film, but that just goes to show sort of, you know, 20, 30 years after this film has come out, how much it means to him. And it is that personal story with his film. And as I said, it's a bit random talking autographs, but where do you feel with the sort of salary side of things? Because, I mean, it's completely understandable, but for me, it's almost unheard of. I'd be really curious to know other directors that might have passed on salaries for films before.
Yeah, that would be interesting, but that comes back to my to the point that we were discussing earlier about how, you know, with a different director in the chair, they probably would have taken a salary for it, and even a bigger one than you know, than Spielberg, which was nothing. And there's and it comes back to that point where there's a sense of, you know, this is more personal because someone, because, you know, a director from a Jewish background has made it. And I don't think you can really shy away from that fact. And it's good that he didn't. I think it would. I think if he did, I'd believe that would have made him feel very, very uncomfortable even now. So it's a good thing that he didn't. Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see if any other director has waived their salary on films for personal reasons.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, and I think, you know, the DGA, and not I don't know the history of it, but, you know, I know it's really relevant to this, but if you don't know how the guilds work in America, you know, a directors guild, you get writers guilds, actors guilds, so many sort of things like that. They're almost unions in a way.
Yeah.
They have a lot of power in Hollywood, certainly more so in the late 70s, early 80s. And I know this is kind of irrelevant today, but if you want the sort of power they have, Steven Spielberg was meant to direct Return of the Jedi. Because George Lucas was expelled as a member of the DGA, Spielberg was not allowed to go and do that film. And that's the kind of power the guilds have, or did have, per se. And again, going back to The Color Purple, which is 1985 or 7. I'm so sorry, I've already forgotten loads of dates in my head. You know, taking the lowest amount possible, I'd imagine if there had to be a conversation with this, they certainly wouldn't have done so. And where I'm kind of going to jump to next is, we mentioned a little bit earlier, you know, the rights were in the early 80s and they sort of almost wasn't ready at the time. We had you on for Empire of the Sun and Last Crusade, which was excellent reviews. Just if you are interested, please do check them out. But certainly, if I'm going to actually go on to Empire of the Sun ever so slightly now, we sort of spoke about how in the 80s he was doing dramas, and he had The Color Purple, which, sorry, that was 1985 because Empire of the Sun's 87. And I know you weren't on the Always review, that's 1989. He did 3 dramas in a row, and they were almost the first times he'd done dramas more so than the usual action adventure or blockbuster or whatnot. And obviously he went to Last Crusade after doing 3 dramas, then Hook, then this. It's really interesting that, you know, he said he wasn't comfortable in the early 80s doing it, and I kind of agree with him. Okay, we're looking here in hindsight of what the films he did after, but I wonder if there was always an inkling from him, and this is purely speculation on my behalf, that he knew he'd done these bigger films. He knew he was a big name, a draw. But I'd imagine he always wanted to do this from the day he didn't, basically the background too, I didn't write it in the schedule, but when he read the book, he didn't believe it was real. He just didn't believe that a story of this proportion was real, which is, yeah, I guess a credit to the story itself. And to Oscar Schindler and what happened across those years and what was able to come from it. But Kyle and Jumps, you saying that, could you have imagined like an early 80s Spielberg doing this? I don't think he did. And I want to say it was probably a conscious choice to do those dramas, get Indiana Jones done before coming onto something like this that is so personal to him.
Yeah, I would. It certainly feels that way. And as you said, it's sort of all just speculation on our part. But going back to what you said, I think I've just reading now that he was drawn to it because of the paradoxical nature of Liam Neeson's character, and asked the question, what would drive a man like this to suddenly take everything he had and put it all in the service of saving lives, which and I think that if it would have been a very different film in the early 80s than in the 90s, because as he said himself, he wasn't mature enough. I think some of his directing choices and would have been not necessarily stifled, but there were things that if he'd made this in the early 80s, that would probably have been taken out. And there were lots of moments I sat through this morning just going, fucking hell, just and I think had a less mature Spielberg made it, those things would have been implied rather than specifically outright shown. So people getting shot pretty much point blank, and the camera sort of lingers for bloody ages while blood pours out their heads, and it's harrowing. And I think had it been made earlier in his career, those sorts of things would probably be on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, it's really well said in that way. And I think one way to look at it, I don't say rise to power, that sounds terrible. If you look at Spielberg's career and the way it went, you obviously had this massive film in Jaws, and you had him spiraling up. And, this big name, big director was doing big films, and not just having the maturity, but it's almost like power not over a studio in a way, but it's kind of like Steven Spielberg isn't this young hit blockbuster director. This is the best of his generation, I'm going to say. I know people want to talk about Scorsese or the others, but to me, he's fundamentally doing the dramas and the bigger films, and I don't think it was possible for him to do this in the early 80s. And I do think it was probably a conscious thing behind the scenes, wanting to give it to Polanski, who had an established career at that point, I would say. Somebody that had been doing films for decades. I don't think Spielberg ever felt comfortable, and obviously Scorsese being that sort of early 70s, a lot of his films, I know they're both early 70s in their own way, but I feel that Scorsese was I don't want to say highly regarded more, that's ridiculous because we're looking at it from a modern perspective, but I can see why he would feel it being comfortable in Scorsese's hands. When it was handed over to him, that's probably the better term for it. And again, when it comes back to him, it being a very personal project. And I'm just going to quickly bring up a couple of other things. So a really big thing for this series, this is his first film with the cinematographer Janusz Kaminski. He has done, I believe, every single Spielberg film since this. It's one of his fundamental partners across the decades. We've been pointing out behind the scenes people, and I don't think it's parallel that to do a film like this is a first film with somebody. And then stick with him since it is almost near perfection. And we'll get to a little bit of some of the cinematography stuff actually shortly because it impacts the story and how they shot it. But just a few of the Spielberg things. Obviously, we know this was very personal to him. Across filming, his family moved to Krakow. And we'll talk about the Oscars, but he did thank his wife in his Oscar speech, saying that he had to come home to her for 92 days. And she was there for him. And the reports that Robin Williams, obviously off the back of Hook, Robin Williams and him stayed close, and Robin Williams would often call him up to try and cheer him up. Now, I don't know the specifics. I don't want to know the specifics of those conversations, but it probably doesn't sound as open as he probably rang him to crack jokes. Obviously, if anyone's familiar with Robin Williams' life, he was a very different person behind the scenes to how he was in the public eye. One of the legends of the screen, and I can only imagine that there was a lot more similarities between Williams and Spielberg when those phone calls were actually going ahead. What I want to kind of jump into now is some of the actual. I put this into the storytelling or the story part of this thing, but it's actually I guess it's a behind the scenes and story and an actual filmmaking process. So one of the goals for this film is they wanted it to feel like a documentary. So we're all familiar that it's shot in black and white. And one of the reasons for this is that they wanted it not to just feel like a documentary, but it doesn't give you a sense of when it was made. And I first read that years ago because I was always curious, why was this film in black and white? And even watching it again in 2022, you know, I know this is a really odd thing to say, but the standouts of the timing of this film to me personally is Liam Neeson, Ralph Fiennes, and Ben Kingsley, probably because they're the three biggest actors in it. But this is a credit to the film that when period piece films come out, they can age very quickly. People can, I don't know if you're familiar with this, not school terms like meet on scene, but people can see aging windows or curtains. They can see fabrics that aren't from that era.
Yeah.
Things might be off, and it's always in the coloring. It's always in the reproduction of those things that is done. You know, from set designs all the way back to to minor stuff. But with this shot in black and white, I don't want to say it's aged perfectly, but it's kind of what they're saying. You could show this to somebody that doesn't know those three actors that are names, and they might think this is genuinely from the 1940s because the black and white use is so effective in that way. And when we speak about being timeless, we're here almost 30 years later. This does not look like a film from 30 years ago. This could have been released last year and it would look the same by the age of those actors. And I kind of want to jump to you off your initial viewing. I know you would have known it's black and white before the film came out, but did you know that sort of stuff as well, or how was it viewing it in black and white? Did it make it more harrowing?
I think so. Whilst you excuse me, whilst you see everything, and it doesn't shy away from the fact that it shows you all the grit and things from it. There seems to be a more sort of, I don't necessarily want to say, I'm trying my best to find the words for it, but an otherworldly quality from it being black and white, where it's like, fucking hell, this is really really dark and depressing, but there's sort of another word, sort of like, I'm really struggling.
The words. No, it's completely understandable.
Yeah, it's definitely makes those scenes more
impactful.
Yes, that's exactly the word. Because had it been all in color, obviously the opening shot is in color, and then it fades back into color at the very end. It's also just one use of color with the girl in the red coat. But had this been a full color film, I think something would have been lost, and I'm not quite sure what that would have been. But the impact of it, I think, may have been lost because you're able to see more. You can visualize more of the intricacies of like the squibs and like, oh, that's off color. That's and like as you said, things from the period not looking right. You'd be able to sort of pick it up. If you're looking for it, whereas if it's in black and white, you get that. You don't get that at all.
No, it's really well said. And one thing, I know it's irrelevant to harp on modern films, but this terrible new trend of films being released in black and white for the sake of it getting a new cut in black and white, I find it quite insulting. Not compared to this, but when you have a filmmaker and a cinematographer who have legit reasons to make a film black and white, it's a conscious filmmaking choice. It's integral to the story, to the plot. And then now it's like a director, like, yeah, here's my black and white cut. Why? Because it looks cool. And it's like, no, they don't look cool. It looks ridiculous. The only one I'd be half curious about is Nightmare Alley because it's obviously got a very contextualized setting. But was it like Logan, Mad Max, and all this stuff? Just it's again, to me, it's that conscious choice of this is why they did it in this film, and this is why it makes sense for a modern film to do a historic effect on it. And even the no storyboarding angle, there were no storyboards because they wanted that documentary feel. And I think they're kind of right with this, that I'd imagine obviously they would have rehearsed scenes and whatnot, but if you storyboard something to perfection, that's going to probably affect the performers and how they want to frame the shots and how they want to set up. And what kind of came with this as well, that Spielberg, there were scenes when Spielberg struggled and he couldn't watch. you mentioned the one earlier when the people are running around, they're picking people of who's to go to the other camps, and then you get probably one of the most heartbreaking moments, which is when they've loaded the buses full of the kids at the same time to go, and it's things like that you can understand why a filmmaker just couldn't look. And it would have been the same for a lot of the cast and crew. A lot of actors, apparently German actors at the time, were reluctant to wear the uniforms, which I completely understand. People have got to think as well. In 1993, that's still very recent history. It's less than 50 years in between. Again, we're here almost 30 years later, but I think people forget that it was a lot closer in that respect. And kind of jumping off that, I know it's been about the costumes and stuff. One of the really big things for this as well, we'll get to performances and some characters a little bit later on, but one of the surviving Schindler's was on set, and they saw Ralph Fiennes in costume, and apparently there was the sort of trembling with fear on the set because he looked so much like him in that costume. And we'll get to characters a little bit later. But one thing I want to kind of end on before we get into characters, actually, I'm actually going to talk about a language thing. So I didn't know this until today, and this really surprised me. I actually think it's really admirable. Obviously, Liam Neeson's using a German accent. The film is in English, but obviously they've all got the accents on. And obviously a lot of extras behind the scenes people. These were all I think they used people from like Poland as well, like local extras, because they wanted them to look European to make it like real life. There was a conscious decision for the film to be in English, and this really surprised me because nowadays we obviously have those conversations where I do think we're not there in terms of foreign cinema, but there is a shifting allegiance now where people are more respectful of foreign cinema, that they are being viewed more. Not to obviously mention the obvious Oscar win for Parasite, but even as a credit to Marvel for once, Shang-Chi, I think like a third of the film was in Mandarin, or a quarter of the film, and I think audiences are slowly more accepting of that. But with this film in particular, there was a discussion of it being done in foreign, and they basically came to the conclusion that it would give people excuses not to look at the on-screen actions, which is, I never thought of it. And you know what? Now, when I read that, I was like, that makes so much sense, because this could have easily been shot in foreign, and I don't think it would have been an issue for me. But again, it's this, as you mentioned earlier, this film educational, people seeing this film not knowing about what happened. You're right, it gives them excuses not to look up. And the horror of this film is that it's real, and that you are seeing this, and you should be seeing this. You shouldn't not turn a blind eye, but this is what people went through, and it is uncomfortable. And this is the message Spielberg's he's trying to portray what went on for so many years, and it's his way of telling it. And if there was, people would be looking down. I'm not saying you want to sit here and look at every scene. It's not fun to look at it, and it will never be. And it's getting the words to say it, that it's a very admirable decision not to have it in the English language. And I think with something so extreme as it being in black and white as well, it would have been really interesting. But I think they made the right choice. Would you say the same?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I sort of want to bring up is that I kind of, you can, for films that you feel should be in, or in the set language, if it's Western made, it kind of it's not necessarily something I agree with, because you can suspend your disbelief to a point where they're just, whilst they're talking English, that you can suspend your disbelief and think, okay, these guys are talking in their own language. It's just we're understanding what they're saying. A good example of this, and it's probably completely off topic, but a good example of how that's used effectively is The Hunt for Red October. So in the Russian submarine, everyone is speaking in English, but when the two subs meet, then the Russians are speaking Russian and the Americans speaking English, and it's very good stylistic choice, and makes you sort of go, okay, this is it puts all the pieces together. So I think you can suspend your disbelief to a point, and it just becomes accepted that they're speaking their own language. You're just understanding what they're saying. And yeah, I would agree that if you had subtitles for native languages for this, or like if you're watching it in the West with a native language, then something would have been lost. You wouldn't, your eyes would be drawn to the bottom of the screen, so you wouldn't see the imagery that is on there and be educated, or see the trauma that characters, and well, I say characters. Oh, sorry, my microphone is falling down. I say characters in the context of the film, but the real life people, you won't see how harrowing that is for them, because you're constantly going, oh, I need to read the subtitles for that. But I suppose if you like this, here's the thing: the general audience might not necessarily be accustomed to watching a film with subtitles on it anyway, and it's definitely something you have to pick up after you watch a few things, where you can just you look at the screen and you can sort of it just comes naturally after a few things. But it may have taken away from a general audience watching it.
No, really well said for that. And what we'll do, we'll move on to characters now. So again, people at home, I'm not going to lie, this has been, I don't really do Brian. This has actually been really difficult to speak about. So I'm going to thank you again, Tom. I'll do it properly at the end. But we're going to focus on the main three we've kind of spoke about, just because, the ensemble on this cast so many great individual moments with characters. And I think it's always a bit more difficult when it's based off real life, knowing these are real people. But we'll really get into the main one. We've got Oscar Schindler played by Liam Neeson. So obviously, if I'm going to go contextually, we'll go to 1993 when the film was released. At the time, Spielberg wanted a known actor. We're going to actually have a really awkward conversation in a minute. But Liam Neeson had been on Broadway. He was nominated for a Tony Award, is the Broadway ones. I forgot the name of the play, and that was what prompted Spielberg to cast him in this. It might be something Christie, maybe, off the top of my head. But Liam Neeson, and this is where I don't want to detract and talk about Star Wars, but one thing for me growing up, I saw Star Wars age of 3. Liam Neeson was Qui-Gon Jinn. I hadn't seen Liam Neeson much. Liam Neeson was then in all these big blockbuster films myself growing up, things like Taken. And Schindler's was a fascinating one when I saw it for the first time, because I was able to see him not act, but I was able to kind of see the film that probably pushed him into the limelight of why he was in so much in the way he was. And I kind of wanted to jump to you, and I don't think this is a criticism of Liam Neeson himself, but we were able to see what he's capable of in this film as an actor. And I mean, the last 5-10 years, he's been typecast in action roles, but it's kind of really sad that we've never really had meteor roles from him. That sounds really disrespectful to Liam Neeson, because he has been great in a lot of films, and I know he's even done TV. But seeing again someone that grew up with Qui-Gon Jinn is one of my favorite things in a relevant giant space franchise. Being able to see him in something else pre 99 as well was a really big thing for me. And I kind of think that not he makes this film. This film to me personally is an accreditation of like Spielberg's career, but taking on a role like Oscar Schindler, and I think we haven't really spoken about individual scenes per se, but it's the last like 10 minutes where the war's over and we get that speech from him. That's the moment to me. And I know that I don't want to get into Oscar stuff, but there's no way on earth Tom Hanks for Philadelphia should have beat Liam Neeson to the Oscar. I'm just going to say this right now. And I've thought it's a lot over the years. But what he's able to convey in the moments going to the car, the speech, I could have got more. It's heartbreaking to watch. It's very emotional viewing still. And it comes down to, again, the direction, the performance, the script, the way the film is shot, the production design, everything that goes together to make the film what it is. But it's that final 5 minutes that I don't want to say justifies the film's existence, it's silly, but you need that closure and where he was to go after. And one thing I want to say with Oscar Schindler, the way this film begins, not that it paints him in a bad light, it shows the film. A lot of people say the film shows his progression towards wanting specifically to save the Jews versus where he was at the beginning. And I don't know the real life history of it all, so I don't really want to comment on that as much. But I never felt like that at the start. I feel like at the start of the film, he's a businessman who's trying to make a business decision that has a slight conscience. And as the film progresses, obviously, you know, he spends more time, he spends years with these people, he knows what the Nazis are doing. He lightens it, but I never think intentionally he was a bad person in it. Is that fair for me to assume? Because it's a very difficult mindset to take into a film like this, and again, not knowing the full real life history of Oskar Schindler.
Yeah. Well, the thing in the film that he says is that, you know, I'm not a good person. I've, you know, exploited and used slave labor and, you know, things like that. But weighed up in the context of what he did, those whilst you know, and this is in terms of viewing the character that Liam Neeson plays rather than the real life his real life counterpart. So just put that context out there. But he may see himself that way, but to the people that he has saved, or the people that he has, you know, that he has given a life back to, is that the wrong way to say it?
No. Well, he's
Yeah.
not only. It's that message at the film, isn't it? That he may have saved hundreds of lives, but there are generations that will exist because of his actions.
Yeah. And
that's
whilst
the
he
power.
may see himself as you know, I'm not a good person. Well, in actual fact, you know, the context of what he did is the thing that matters, not his not the act. Because while he says in the film, you know, I've you know, exploited workers, I've essentially used slave labor. Yeah, but the context of that is you're picking these people up from like Auschwitz and give it and make it, you know, essentially saving their lives. So it's the context that counts for it. And this is easily Liam Neeson's best film role. I'd say easily. And you know, it is a shame because we've got he's really good actor, and you see it in stuff like The Grey. He was like phenomenal in The Grey. But we just haven't seen enough of that over the years post sort of him taking up those typecast action roles, and it seems to have diminished people's opinions, or especially from people I've spoken to personally, that it seems to have diminished how he's viewed as an actor.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating one with him because I think, you know, I know it's not a topic, but Natasha Richardson passed away, I think, in 2009. And I this sounds horrible, and I don't mean this in this way, but I'd imagine like he spoke about the impact of that. He spoke recently. I think his son spoke as well about Natasha because his son's moving into acting now. That happened in 2009, and he's sort of been typecasting his action roles for 10 sort of plus years. And I think you're right that it almost feels wasted that we've not been able to see him take on these meteor roles per se.
Yeah.
And I know you had, again, it's irrelevant, but you've had a recent episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi. I know it's been spoiled to you already, which wasn't our thumbnail. But even in like something as incredible as him popping up for a few seconds as a character from the 90s, you know, it meant a lot. And, you know, this is someone that had been on Broadway, that had Tony nominations, that more often than not, people can transfer from stage to screen better than screen to stage, I always feel. That's always been my personal vision. I know people may disagree, people may not. But yeah, it is his best role. And, you know, it's a role that I'd imagine for anyone involved in this was probably tough mentally to be on set, to witness those events, to you know, just be involved with. And looking back at this film's legacy, I'd assume they're probably proud of their involvement with the film and its meaning. But you know, it can't be taken away contextually how tricky it would have been. And
Yeah.
and
Considering the fact that if you read some of the behind the scenes, that there were some anti-Semitic incidents on it,
on set.
especially from a woman. Was just reading about who encountered fines in his Nazi uniform and told them, the Germans were charming people. They didn't kill anyone who didn't deserve it. And it's stuff like that I think, you know, puts it into context that this is a film that had to be made.
Yeah. There could probably, again, it sounds not to genreify, but this is one story from 6 years, probably one of the more noble stories of those years. And you've got to think people at home, because it's about the millions of people that didn't have somebody like Oscar Schindler
Yeah.
watching over them, protecting them, and it's things like that. And again, it's a reflection on modern people tease, and again, it was so much more recent, and people now deny it even more so. There is historical stuff. There are charities, there are museums. There you can literally go to Auschwitz on trips and stuff. And I actually want to really quickly bring up Spielberg. When he went to Auschwitz, he wasn't sad, he was outraged, and kind of hit me quite hard, that because it's that logic that of course it would be sad to go, but I can understand why he would be outraged, because this atrocity was real.
Yeah.
And that's the thing for me. Things like this happen. They happen today, not to lesser circumstances, but there have been genocides since 1945. And I think as well, for people then to be like, this didn't happen, is just obscene and infuriating. And people's reaction to us of that is disgraceful. And one disgrace I'm going to really quickly bring about, I won't have a conversation on it, but this completely blew my mind. And anybody at home, if you don't know this is honestly just ridiculous. Mel Gibson wanted to play Oscar Schindler. I'm not going to go into a conversation on Mel Gibson, but if you don't know why that's so terrible, just go and have a look at Mel Gibson's thoughts about certain religions. So I'm going to leave that there. Unless you want to quickly add in.
Yeah, I'll quickly jump in. So if
I know it's off point, but I just need to say how insane that is.
It is in the context of now, and I think had he been cast, and back in 1993, big name, it's sort of, it's not necessarily, this may be the wrong thing to say, but it's not, he's a big name. You want, a big name.
People would be looking at Mel Gibson, not Oscar Schindler, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they would. And plus, and it would have been fine at the time, I think, but the sort of film would have been, worse off for it. And that's mainly because of the big name attached to it. But then you get later down the line, and then his many incidents happen, and it would have tainted the legacy of the film had he been involved.
I'll sort of fire up and just sort of end it with, a film like this would suddenly not be taken seriously. And that is no fault of any single individual, bar the one that could have almost been in. And I would, again, credit Spielberg. He wanted unknowns at the time, smaller names, people that weren't household names, and I completely respect that. I'd say the biggest name in this one is Ben Kingsley. We'll get to in a minute, but I want to talk about Ray Fiennes. I say this every time I do a video and he's involved, and if I've told you this story before, apologies if I have. Every time he's brought up in our household, he was born on the same day, the same year as my dad. It's brought up all the time at home. So I always bring up on videos so people can share the pain of me telling that story. Same place as well, not same hospital though, same city.
Same hospital.
That would be weird.
It's right next to the same bed.
It's probably how he'd want to go if he couldn't say it. Like, he'd love to tell everyone. If we got to meet, if I ever meet Ray Fiennes, I'll honestly tell that story. He'd be like, "What's wrong with you?"
I met you once when you've been born. I was there.
Same day, 23 hours, 59 minutes apart, potentially. But yeah, but Ammon Girth, this is hard to talk about. So we used to run we still do the series, we haven't done it well. Battle of the Brackets, we've been on it a lot before. I know this is really off topic. We did Best Villain once, and I kind of picked Ammon Girth and won. Not that that means anything, but I actually look back and think it was really disrespectful I picked it, because it was like people were talking about like these like fictional evil beings, and then I was there like this like real horrific real life person. Obviously it won. So Battle of the Brackets was a really fun series. We'll try and bring it back soon. But Ray Fiennes in this film is probably one of the most terrifying performances I've ever seen from an individual. And one of the reasons so terrifying is not because it's this great performance, because again, all this the same ways we've got Liam Neeson, this great sets and everything. It's because he's real, and this film was real, and I got kind of quite scared watching it yesterday because, yes, I'd seen the film before, but the whole scene of Schindler, I know this is sort of jumping into it, but when Schindler's discussing him, trying to be nice, like, you can feel like a god essentially by pardoning people. And the message it's having on this is that they can feel like a god as long as Ammon Girth is going to kill them, but then he chooses not to. I know this is really random. And then we proceed to get 5-10 really intense minutes where it's just him choosing not to kill people, which is devastating. of the reality of the situation, and obviously ends with him, sniping a kid because he can't clear a stain off the toilet. I know it's like a one scene thing, but his performance in this is still probably one of the most terrifying performances in all of cinema. And the thing is, I really like Ray Fiennes as an actor, and he spoke about this role over the years. He put on a lot of weight for this as well. Obviously, we get those scenes of him, where we get to see him just like chilling on the rooftop and stuff, and it kind of makes it more terrifying how much time you get to spend from him. And I want to say again, it's a credit to Spielberg that he doesn't just choose to bring him on for scenes where he'll meet Oscar Schindler. He chooses to have him around. We consciously spend a lot of time with him, and we get to get an insight into this absolutely insane individual. And the scariest thing about it is how charming Ralph Fiennes is playing him. Does that make sense? That's not meant disrespectfully, but he comes across like in his pack within the Nazi as a charming individual. Not me saying he is. You're trying to see where I'm going from that. He was popular in their ranks for things. He was a drinker. He's on the parties with them. Like, there's a reason he got to where he is, which makes everything in this film so much more terrifying with him.
I'm just gonna put it out there and say, that Ray Fiennes in this is phenomenal. He is really good in it, playing, someone that you absolutely despise. And I think it's not wrong to say that he does come across charming, but there is also to some degree, obviously, you can't take away from his actions at all. But I think what the film tries to get at is that these people may appear to be charming, but and you see it when he's pardoning people in the film. There's an underlying that I just really want to kill somebody, because he absolutely revels in it. He is in love with destroying people's lives and killing on a whim. It's a brilliant turn from Fiennes, and I think that should be said as well, because whilst it is uncomfortable to watch, and the best things, and okay, so here's something that's sort of going back to slightly what we were discussing earlier, but the best way to educate is by making someone feel uncomfortable, and then they know their limit, and how can they push past that. So with Fiennes in this, it's very uncomfortable to watch, but you learn a lot more about the regime through him.
Yeah, and I think as well, a really brave thing is to show his hanging at the end, because if you didn't know the historical side of it, when these death camps were found by the Russians, they would massacre everybody in every single way that was involved. They would find out the horrors of it. I know Band of Brothers didn't show it as much, but Band of Brothers has like a similar ending where you see the Americans discovering a camp for the first time. But the hanging that he does in this, it's a very brutal scene, and I like the closure they give his character. And I don't want to say it's earned. That sounds very disrespectful. But we've spent so much time with him. It's fair that the public see what happened to him truly, and even in his final moments, he does a Hail Hitler, doesn't he? Which just goes to show how scary that is. And his performance. He was nominated for I haven't said it, but him and Liam Neeson both nominated for Oscars for this. And you've got to think how Ralph Fiennes was probably 31. I know that because of what I said about the birthday thing. He was 31 when this came out, which is really young, and I know this is really relevant, and this is really changing the subject. And apologies, but I want to say it. Pre-GoldenEye, Liam Neeson and Ralph Fiennes were two names that were in discussion with Eon to play James Bond. I know this is irrelevant to this, but GoldenEye 95, this 93. There's no coincidence that Eon saw this film and approached both of them. And if anyone's curious, I know it's really irrelevant, but Natasha Richardson actually said to Liam Neeson she would divorce him if he took on the role as James Bond, which makes me think that there was actually a lot more than just, conversations. I wonder if screen tests happened. And obviously Ray Fiennes would eventually go on to play M in James Bond. Again, irrelevant to this discussion tonight, but I just want to say, like, I think either of them would have made a phenomenal Bond. Ray Fiennes,
Yeah.
personally, I think would have, but after doing a film like this, I'm going to kind of.
You,
It's a bit weird. You know what we spoke about Liam Neeson, how he became a big name after. In retrospect, I'm glad Ray Fiennes wasn't, because you would then go back to see a film like this and you think, oh, look, it's James Bond. In the same way, I look at every Daniel Craig, every Brosnan, every Connery film, it's, oh, look, it's James Bond doing this. And I'm glad it didn't, because it kind of protects the role in a very weird way that Ray Fiennes had an incredible career and didn't become, like a franchise A-lister. Does that sound weird or fair?
No. That sounds fair. I would like to jump back to that you're unsure how Liam Neeson lost out to Tom Hanks in Philadelphia, but how did Fiennes not like? How did
I don't know
he
who was
not?
up against, if I'm being honest. Was it against
So
Denzel for Philadelphia?
Tommy Lee Jones won for The Fugitive.
I've never seen it. Is that the I Don't Really Care one?
Yeah. He's really good at
okay.
it. He's really good at it. But
I didn't know that. That's
after watching this, bad. I'm like, how I. But that's just sort of personal opinion and bias, because I think
It's fair to. I didn't know that. If I watch The Future,
but
angry now.
He is, the supporting actor category for that year was pretty good. You had John Malkovich in The Line of Fire, which he is fantastic in. Obviously, Tommy Lee Jones won. Ralph Fiennes in this. You had DiCaprio, Pete Postlethwaite in there as well. So I can see why, but I just
understandable. Especially when you watch it and when you see that performance as well.
Yeah,
it's the transition to becoming this man, which kind of makes it all the more scary. And if we really want to talk, I want to speak about Ben Kingsley. So he played Jack Stern, and this was news to me. So the role was changed. So Jack Stern was a real person. He was the accountant for Oscar Schindler. But what they did in this film, they merged 3 real life people together to take this one role, and that was the factory manager, the secretary, and the accountant. I should have the real names of these people. Apologies, I don't. This really not surprised me, but this is one of those conscious. We have to make the jump from page to screen decisions. I feel like this happens in biopics a lot more than we think. And I'll be blunt and say I don't mind it. I can understand that people may be aggrieved by it, but Sir Ben Kingsley is one of the greatest character actors I would ever say. If you look at him more often than not, I feel that he's very rarely in a lead role, and he's incredible in supporting roles. Obviously, played Gandhi, he won an Oscar.
Yeah.
If you've seen Sex to Beast, that's one of my favorite ever crime films. And in this, it says that he essentially is playing the conscience of Oscar Schindler. And it's quite amazing in this one because it's a very subdued role. I think when you've got an extreme in Ray Fiennes, which we spoke about, you have a lead role in Liam Neeson, you need that counterbalance. And Ben Kingsley just has this calming presence of the situation, of issues, and it's a really good performance. And I just think it's an understated performance. And that's a lot harder to do than people think. And I think where we are with this character is when we get to not even the ending, when we get to the train sequence where he leaves his papers at home for one day, and then he's on the train, and we get Liam Neeson having to find him on that train, and his apologies about I'm so sorry, like this won't happen again. And later on in the film, you get when they're clearing out the ghettos, you've got him with his papers, and you kind of have that moment of tension because it happened once before. Where do you feel with his performance in this? Because I think it's just fascinating to put together 3 real life characters to form this.
I am going to be completely honest and say that I had absolutely no idea it was Ben Kingsley in this.
And that's fair to say, because I didn't know it was ever him until yesterday.
Yeah, I was watching the credits. Hold on, who did he play? It was sort of like he seemed to merge so well into the role that I didn't recognize him at all.
And normally you can, because he's always maybe it's not to joke say it's because he's got hair in this, but normally I feel that Ben Kingsley brings a presence to roles.
Yeah, there's a very
and if-
distinct and a very distinct look that he has as well, and I just think that that's missing from here, and for all the better, because I was at a loss as to I genuinely thought whilst watching it that it was an unknown.
That's
Genuinely.
great though. But that it just goes to show the performance from him and the direction, use of the character, costume, everything that makes it up. I think it's really well said of him. And I don't have too much more to say because I really like his character. Yeah, as I said, he's the conscience Liam Neeson, but it's not as much to delve into with Shin himself. But if we want to move on to the soundtrack, really quickly, we always just every week we come and praise John Williams. For this film, what really, really surprised me was John Williams thought it'd be too challenging and told Spielberg he needed to find someone better. John, just put that into context. Everyone take a minute to think. John Williams told Steven Spielberg he needs to find somebody better to do this film. Now, that's probably a credit from John Williams knowing how good this film was going to be in advance. It probably also has a lot of personal stuff around it. Similar, probably circumstances, he might have been uncomfortable taking on something of the nature of this. And he recruited Zach Perlman, who plays the violin in the score and throughout the film as well. But say that he won the Oscar for this, and it's one of John Williams' best scores. I'll say that just doing this series of Spielberg ones, and it's one of his more understated scores. That it's not blasting brass instruments. It's almost the same melody done differently for 3+ hours. And one striking part of the score I'm going to speak about, and this is the same with you, is when they clear out the ghettos. One of the most insane images, not insane images, sorry, one of the most like disturbing moments is the German soldier playing the piano. Because we know that someone's been killed in that piano as well, literally moments before, and they're like playing there, like they're having fun whilst they're doing these like horrific things. I just have to say that John Williams' score, this was just, it's done right. And it's never, the one thing you say about John Williams is sometimes he not can overdo a score, but he can bring a gravitas where he can become bigger than the film. But in this, it's so on point that he's aware of this. He's aware of what's happening and never once tries to do too much with it. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, it's a very, very understated score. And I think it complements the film really, really well. And actual fact, as we're recording, I have the soundtrack on repeat right now. So I have it's very melancholy and provocative in some aspects, where it really like complements it when you see the two together or hear the two together, the images on screen and the soundtrack, it complements it really well, and it draws attention to moments in the film that Spielberg wants you to pay attention to, and the soundtrack complements that. So it's making you, it's drawing your ears and your eyes.
Yeah, no, it's really well said of that. And I kind of want to add another thing. Again, we're going to speak about the Oscars shortly, but this is Spielberg's second film of 1993. We spoke about it last week, but the fact John Williams could do Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in the same year, is just again not just a credit to Spielberg's direction, but to John Williams's musical. I don't know what would you call it. It's just one of the best ever. And the fact he originally thought Spielberg could get. By Spielberg's response, that was saying everybody better's already dead. That's like, it's just that like friendly, I guess, banter between them. But it also just goes to show, I'd say that Spielberg saying he's the best composer in the world, which he is. I think he still is. But if we move on to the soundtrack, we're sort of heading into the final bit now. So we're going to talk about the legacy of this film and the iconography at the time. Now, box office is irrelevant to me for a film like this, but this made $321 million worldwide. Apparently, at the time, when the film was originally in production, they were basically saying that, I know it's not really a thing, but Holocaust films don't make money. It's a really weird thing to think about, that I don't think anyone, we do this every week, which is why I bring the box office, but they are right that it's not a genre people are going to thrive to the cinema to see. But I think it goes to show the not popularity of the film. That's an unfair, I'm trying to think of the right term, that people went to see this film. I'm trying to think of the conscious, like, if you knew there was a Holocaust film in the cinemas that you were going to see,
it
you're
piqued
choosing,
interest.
you're choosing to see a film that you know the real life circumstances around. And I just think that number goes to show that people, as you said, piqued interest, were
Yeah.
aware. They
What
maybe
was
wanted to educate themselves. I'm trying to
yeah?
think about.
What was the estimated budget?
I think about 25 million before the film was in pre-production
Okay.
potentially. I feel like it could be more, so I'm gonna load up, and I do want to say it has been re-released over the years. It was released, I think, for the 25th anniversary. Yeah, budget $22 million.
Yeah.
That's a mighty. Considering in 1993 the highest grossing film was always Jurassic Park of 900. That's Spielberg taking like two of the biggest films of the year. Completely different films. I'm gonna
Yeah.
obviously say what they're about, but again, like I'm just saying to you, how on earth does a director release two of the best films ever made in 1 year, one of which is one of probably the best Oscar films ever made? And I don't want to call it an Oscar film, but you know what I mean. One arguably the best film ever made, another one arguably the best blockbuster ever made, and he's done it in the same calendar year.
Yeah.
That just I can't. And if you don't know the behind the scenes, when he was filming, we spoke about Jurassic Park, but he would spend Monday to Friday filming in Krakow. They built sets near Auschwitz as well, and at the weekend he'd fly to Paris for post production on Jurassic Park, looking at giant dinosaurs. That is a feat unknown to mankind, that a director can have the mental willpower to do so. And again, to the quality of each of those films to be at where they are.
Yeah.
Um,
But I suppose, and of course, this is all speculation as well, on my part. But I suppose it's the it's taking yourself out of a personal environment and moving somewhere
yeah,
that you can recuperate. And that sounds really weird, recuperating by editing a film and working pretty much 7 days a week. But it's sort of that period of you can reflect and think about something different, think about something else to ease your mind from all the, because it was an emotional shoot for Spielberg, and he said that multiple times. So it's alleviating that emotion by jetting off to do post production on Jurassic Park.
yeah. And again, what we said earlier, he takes a 4 year, well, between releases, more of like a 3 year break, I'd say, after. And what we're going to next, we'll talk about the Oscars. Now, I'll list them off properly, but we'll have a mini discussion on Spielberg after. But this won 7 awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Score, Editing, Cinematography, and Art. And if you didn't know, Jurassic Park also won 3 that same year. So his films won 10, but Schindler's is obviously 7. But the big thing for me right now here, you've been on so many of these reviews with us over the last few months. This is him finally winning Best Director. Now, I'm just going to say this here. A lot of directors win Best Director because it's look, you've done this for X amount of years. This is your career award. This is a great thing. This is not the film for me personally where it's like, yeah, Pump Fist wins Best Director. This is, look at the film you've made. This is us rightfully giving you this award, but this isn't a celebratory of your. I know it's a celebratory of your achievement in directing, but this isn't a celebration of you. To me, I read this. This is a celebration of your film and your commitment and what you've done. And I watched his speech today when he won it as in '94. The ceremony took place, and he sort of opens as usual. Thank you. Cracks really quick joke. I'm actually holding one of these, and then he's really well articulated in speaking that. He goes through some of the names he spoke about today. That he spoke about the Paul Pfefferberg, who he said, without him, the book couldn't have been published, and he wouldn't have been able to have learned about the story. And obviously, he spoke really well for a few minutes on making this film. He thanked his wife, saying that for 72 days he had to come home to her about his day, which just go. It's Kate Capshaw, obviously from Temple of Doom, which just goes to show off that moment alone the impact that filming would have had on him. And then he dedicates it for, I think he says something incredible like, for this is for the 6 million people that aren't here. and for the billion at home watching, they can't be a part of this. And I think that's what tired me, that he's very emotional in receiving that award.
Yeah.
And as I said, this isn't the triumphant fist bump that some directors have, and it shouldn't be. This is him, he's had this project, he's had this idea, and as we said, 10 years this has first come to him to look to potentially do this. And again, it's not capping him for being Steven Spielberg. This is for the film he's made. And we spoke a lot, we said the word personal a lot today. This film is fundamentally, to me, I think the most, even when Fabelmans comes out, which is about his family, this is what I'm really curious for. Could the Fabelmans be as personal as Schindler's is to him? Which is it's a different conversation in its own right. But how do you feel with him winning director? You've been on a few of these reviews for us, blockbusters for dramas. It's a big moment in cinema, and I'd be really curious to see who today's equivalent be.
I would definitely agree that it's not a fist bump, a sort of fist cheering moment for him winning Best Director. That probably would have come before had he picked up a Best Director award for previous films. It's a very understated award, and I think there's something to be said about the impact the film had on people's decision making, and not necessarily give here's award, you're fantastic, and whilst he is, it's more about the impact of the film and his part in making it and shaping it to what it was. I think it's definitely a deserved Oscar. Let's put it that way. Massively. But there's something there that is more melancholy, more thought provoking in the fact that he has won it for this rather than for something else.
No, I'm 100% with you with this, and obviously he would have won it as well for best film. He did produce this film as well, and we know that I think the second and only other time he's won best director is Saving Private Ryan, which we'll get to in about 5-6 weeks, just going off the top of my head. And yeah, you're right there. What I really want to quickly say, I'm trying to find it, which is really frustrating me. After this film came out, Spielberg created his own charity. I have literally lost the link I had to it. It was essentially a way for people to learn more about what happened with the Holocaust, and I think it's to help with the filmic side of things. They funded documentaries into this in the years that have followed since, and I know that with Krakow, with this film coming out, the city bought Schindler's factory, and they've made a permanent exhibition that I think opened in the early 2010s, which is great to see, because one thing a lot of people speak about with not just that wouldn't have been because of the film's success, but with historic things, we live in not an era. I'm not don't want to get into housing conversations, but you always get these stories of these like famous historical buildings, monuments, artifacts being destroyed, and like new flats take their place, and you lose out on history. And I think for things like that, it's so important that they are, history preserves. And I know that, with the Holocaust, you've got the Holocaust museums, you've got the charities, you can visit them. It shouldn't ever go away. And so that this should be a film for people to learn more. Sorry, I found it now. The Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation. That's what Spielberg founded. And I think some of the documentaries they worked on is Anne Frank Remembered, Lost Children of Berlin, and The Last Day. So I know I'm reading that off a wiki. But, the fact that it wasn't just he did this film and moved on. This is an important part of his life and the years that have followed. And that's kind of gonna not run out the reviews. I mean, we've gone almost an hour and a half. Obviously, we're not having a favorite scene section with a bit of common sense for everyone at home for this. But I don't know if you want to speak about any individual scenes. If I'm being honest, I think I've covered a lot of them, and it's quite difficult to speak of in specifics. If you'd want to speak about them, that's fair enough. But I'm quite happy.
Yeah, there's one scene in particular that it's a conversation around Ralph Fiennes' performance as well. So there's a moment where it's absolutely frightening, where he pulls out someone from the factory
And the
to
guns not
shoot.
working.
Yeah, to shoot them point blank, and he tries multiple different guns, and I think based on how cold it was or some mechanisms not working, that it's not able to fire. And you can just see the guy start to plead for his life, and I think that's the one thing. I think if you he starting to humanize himself to find his character and the real life person, and that's just harrowing and frightening to watch, where he just and you can see that he is so angry, so frustrated that this thing is not
Guns not
firing,
working.
and he's rampantly pulling the trigger, and it gives you a like, this guy is unhinged. He wants to kill, he wants to murder.
Yeah. And I think, going off what you said there, I won't go into specifics, but there's a lot of scenes in this film where they might not be about the protagonist, the antagonist. They might not be about factory workers. We get to spend a minute with somebody for it to end in horror.
Yeah.
I think one of the most obvious ones is the structural engineering lady, which is just horrific to watch. And I think when we spoke about the screenplay being extended, to me, I think it's things like this where they wanted to include evidence of things that happen. You get the story of the one in every two just getting shot, because you got the chicken as well, the kid in the chicken. There's so many horrible things in this, and as I said, we're not doing a favorite scene. This isn't that kind of video today, but if you have seen this film, you'll completely understand that. And there are a lot of scenes like that where it's just eye-opening, because we know it was real. We know this did happen. This isn't fiction. This is fact. And there's probably, as we said, hundreds and hundreds of others more, which we might know about, not about ourselves, or maybe there are even things they weren't even willing to put in this, which would be terrifying to think about. But yeah, that's gonna wrap up the review for this. We're gonna head into our final thoughts, which is really tricky for a film like this. I'm just gonna say what I've always said about this film. To me, this is probably the best film I've ever seen in my lifetime. Yes, I haven't seen, every other film that's at the perch of that list, and it isn't a matter of opinion. But there is, to me, a difference between what is the best and what do I enjoy the most. I fathom to say I do not enjoy watching a film like this, and I've said that many a time before. I don't think I'd ever see this film for a second time, if I'm being honest. But to me, the impact this had, seeing it those years ago, seeing it yesterday, I still think to this day that this is one of the best films ever made, and I can't ignore the glaringness of the fact that Steven Spielberg released this film on the same year as Jurassic Park, making it at the same time as Jurassic Park. To me, is the greatest achievement a living director has ever done. Is drop Schindler's List and Jurassic Park in the same year, and it is credit to him as a director. And as I said, this is an educational film that I think everybody should see at least once in their lifetime. As tough viewing as it is, I think it is necessary. And I think there's a lot of real life stuff today that could be mirrored and people could do seeing something like this. And yes, it isn't comfortable, but it is important. And it is far more important for you to see this than to avoid it. So again, I'm just going to leave this here. This to me is the best film I've ever seen in my lifetime. And that's filmmaking and everything in that way. So I know you're a bit fresher to it today, but if you've got any closing thoughts, just go ahead.
Yeah, it's not one I would watch on repeat. Let's put it that way. It's so I think with the length of it, the subject matter, it's definitely a film I would need to be in the mood for, and that's really weird to say, but like
it's fine.
You'd have to sit down and be okay. Today, I'm going to educate myself, and I'm going to be in a contemplative mood and sit down and watch Schindler's List. It's not one you can just whack on like you're watching Indiana Jones and just have a good time. You're not going to have a good time watching it at all. But I would say that it is, but I didn't enjoy it, and that's mainly because of the subject matter that it presents, not necessarily about how good the film is. But it's definitely up there in from what I've seen, one of the best that I've personally watched. The filmmaking is on point. The the subject matter, whilst uncomfortable, massively uncomfortable, it draws you in, and it presents you with facts, and it presents you with the subject matter that this actually happened, and this is and as I said at the beginning, it's Spielberg's most educational films.
Really well said of that, and I think you said the right thing. You've got to be in the mood, and not that it matters behind the scenes. I was meant to do this on Thursday. On Thursday, I got Star Wars Celebration tickets. I said to myself, I cannot sit down right now and watch a 3-hour film because I've not got the mindset and the respect to do so. And it's things like that I think is important for film, because some people dismiss you can put a film on any point, that sometimes you've got to be in the right state of mind. And I always mean it in a respectful manner, that I don't want to watch a certain film and I want to pick up my phone. I don't want to pick up my phone for a film like this. I want to watch this properly.
Yeah, it's like one of my favorite films, the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, and The Thin Red Line are two of my favorite films, and I have to be in the mood to watch them because they're so long, and the subject, and obviously they're not as heavy as this, but you've got to be in the right mood to watch them. I think that's true with anything as well.
It's really well said, and you're right. It is true with them as well. And as I said, I think that's going to round out this review. So I know it's a bit weird to plug.
Yeah, I'd say it was more a sort of hour-long discussion on not the history and what the film means and how in what context it means to us as well. I think that's so I wouldn't really necessarily class it as a review. Yeah.
No, it's part of it. As I said, we've not dissected scenes per se. We've not gone in that mindset. And as we've kind of said before, that it's such an important film, and just what you're going to say there, I'm trying to take what you just said, which is bang on. And it's finding out some of this behind the scenes stuff and why this film is important and the meaning of a film like this. So as I said, comment your thoughts, maybe not on the film, but maybe comment your thoughts on this video, because this has been, we've been doing videos on this channel for 7 years now. And I think this is probably the most uncomfortable I've ever been on one. So I hope that's come across in a viewing way. But certainly, Tom, I've known you for probably 7 years. You've been on this since the early days. But even seeing you lost for words in the best comment I can give you was quite probably an insight into this film. Again, you're so fresh off view. I'm just going to say thank you for coming on this today. I know it's not easy. I know this hasn't been an easy review to organize if people are wondering at home. This has been a very difficult review, and when the idea came for this series, this wasn't a let's look at how great Spielberg's films are, which it's part of that too, but I didn't look at it seriously and think, oh no, I've got to do Schindler's List again. It was never things like that. It was we're looking at his entire career, a retrospective on his career. We're building towards The Fabelmans, his most personal film, and we've said that a lot today. That's a film about his family. This is a film about his religion, and also he thanked his mother in that Oscar speech as well. So imagine how important religion probably was for him as well growing up. So as I said, let us know your thoughts on maybe Schindler's List or this video. I'd be really curious to hear them. And I said, if you do enjoy Steven Spielberg, if you enjoy this video, maybe you've not started other entries. We've got 15 already on the channel. We've got 17 more after today. This series, it's our big one for the year, and really appreciate a lot of feedback we're getting from it from certain people. So please do consider hitting the subscribe button for this series. There's a lot more films on the way, and into the weird segues as we do. Next up is Jurassic. Well, the formal title is The Lost World Jurassic Park. That's going to go up on Tuesday, the 19th of July. Obviously, it's going to be very different to today's video. And as I said, if you are a fan of Steven Spielberg, please do consider checking that out. And our review for Jurassic Park is already up on the channel from last week. And just taking a very quick look about what is coming up. As I said, we've got The Lost World. Then we've got Amistad, Saving Private Ryan, and AI, Artificial Intelligence. So, we're in the 90s and we're heading into the noughties. It's a very quick decade. As we said, there's a 4-year gap in between this and The Lost World, which just goes to show the impact that this film and 1990 had on him as an individual, and we'll be covering that next week. Our social medias are scrolling as well. Don't feel as comfortable as normal, just hyping them all up individually. So, if you're curious, we announce videos on there. Go check them out in the description below. You can find them on there. And Tom, I've got your socials as well. I want people to follow you on there. Obviously, you do run a blog as well. I've had you on for a lot of these episodes. We're going to have you on for some more. And obviously, me and you agreed we're not going to do the usual sort of sign-offs with this review today. But if you want to tell the people where they can find you for other stuff, please do so.
So filmsandbeer.co.uk and at filmsandbeer on Twitter. I don't really want to go into what the blog's about, because it wouldn't feel right to just, especially after the discussion we've had.
Yeah,
but those are places to find me.
100% said, people, please do follow Tom. We will have you on for some more of these. I think Minority Report, I've got you on the list 100% for. I know you're big on your sci-fi. So as I said, if you're a fan of Spielberg, stick around. Thank you to everybody at home. I'm not going to do the usual plugging of everything else happening on the channel. There's a lot happening. So thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Again, this has been very different. And yeah, I'll be happy to, if you have any conversation points, hit us up a DM on Twitter. We're usually on there, probably the best place to do so, or get me on my personal one. It's in that bio description as well. Drop me a message because I'm curious to hear what people think. So thank you for watching. We hope you've liked it, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.